Okay, so if you've got to this point, I assume you've installed, or just unzipped the NTCsim software. You don't actually need to install it, you just need to unzip it. And you've double-clicked Run GIS, and that's done its thing, and you've had this pretty window pop up, basically. So if you've got this far, I might just talk you through what this window is showing, because it'll help when we talk about the software in a minute. So you see it's just shown in the window is just a whole bunch of grid cells, and that's the city we have. So we're just going to be modelling a hypothetical city, and that city is divided into nice convenient square travel zones. So if you want to think about each of these squares as a travel zone, the city is just divided into those travel zones. And the city is also, so the city is defined basically by these travel zones, these square travel zones, and also by the concept of activities. So to keep the simulation, or to keep things conceptually simple, we don't assume the city is made up of people and jobs and commercial centres and all that sort of thing. We just have an abstraction of all that called activities, and that's the sole descriptor of land use in the city. So each of these grid cells has a set number of activities. So you can click on one of the grid cells. So let's click on the red one. I'll tell you why it's red in a minute, but let's click on this central red one, and you'll see that the name of this is grid square 2525. So the names are all boring, it's the X and Y coordinate, and there are 15,335 activities in that grid square. So this activities is the sole descriptor of land use. So that tells you basically how much stuff is going on, and stuff includes people, jobs, commercial activity, basically drivers of travel demand, if you want to think of activities that way. So that's the basic setup of the city. So you've got a city, it's made up of these square travel zones, and inside each of these travel zones, or grid squares if you want to call them that, there's a set number of activities, and it's the number of activities in each zone that are the drivers of travel demand, or trip generators if you want to think about them that way. Now I've defined this city myself just for the purpose of this example. So if you scroll up the top, you can see sort of toward out the edges of the city it's all this deep blue, and that's actually the edge of the city. So where it's deep blue, there's 0 activities in those cells. So there's going to be no trips to or from those squares. And if you go back to the sort of the middle-ish, you'll see this red square is actually my CBD. So I've defined a CBD with quite a few activities in it, and the number of activities in each travel zone declines pretty quickly as you move away from the CBD. But I have also defined these other hubs, so these other sort of smaller centres as you move away from the CBD. There are these smaller centres with, a few more activities in them basically, and that's what these sort of bluish areas in a checkerboard pattern are, moving away from the CBD. But that's it basically. I've defined a pretty simple city. It's circular, more or less. So if you scroll around a bit, you'll see that it's circular. So there's a strong CBD, or a relatively strong CBD, and distribution activities declines away from the CBD. And you would want to define your own city if you want to simulate something different. So you might want to define a city with, a smaller city, or with different distribution of activities, or you may want to have it some irregular shape rather than a circle. And you can do all that, but to do that you need to define your own distribution of activities, because as I said, it's the number of activities in each square that act as the underlying driver of demand, of trip generation basically. Okay, so that's the basic sort of quick overview of the city that we're going to be simulating, and we can actually close this window now. So I only opened this so you could view the city, and I could just explain about the basic concept of the grid square, and activities is the determinant of trip generation. But we don't need this graphical window anymore, so we can close that. You can actually also close this sorry, that one. Close this window, and then we're basically back out again. So that's, I might stop this video here, and the next one is we will actually start the software. Oh no, actually we'll just do that before we go into the next video. So we've checked whether you have the software, we've had a look at the city that we're going to be simulating, so let's actually start the simulation now. So we go back to the NTCsim folder. Before we double clicked Run GIS, but this time we're going to double click on Run. So we double click on Run, and it'll ask you if you want to run it. It might do, depending on your security settings. You do want to run it, and you should then get a window that pops up, looks like this, and it'll start printing out information also. So be warned that the software can take a long time to run, depending on the city that you're simulating, how big it is and that sort of thing. So depending on the city that you're simulating and some of the different options you choose, and I'll talk about options in a minute, it can take from as little as 10 minutes or 15 minutes to run to several hours. So you kind of have to be patient. Generally it's pretty verbose, so things like this, it'll print out lots of detail as it goes, and you can safely ignore all of that detail really. But yeah, it will continue to print stuff as it works, but you've got to be patient. Even if it stops printing stuff for a while, it may be just doing a calculation, so you will have to leave it for a while rather than getting impatient with it. So okay, so I'm going to leave that running there, and I'll stop the software here. In the next video I'll talk a little bit about the background to how the software basically works, not in a programming sort of sense, but just how it models travel demand basically. Okay, so